All right, here we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. My name is Emily Stewart. I'm the Manager of Education and Engagement Programs at Aperture. We're so excited to have Richard Renaldi here with us tonight. In an effort to engage with our community during these uncertain times, we're excited to launch a series of virtual events. Over the next few months, we'll be hosting weekly live stream artist talks on timely topics with photographers, writers, curators, and our editors. We're very excited to kick off this live streaming program with Richard Renaldi, who's here tonight to discuss his work touching strangers in relation to the current pandemic. Richard was born in Chicago in 1968. He received a BFA in photography from NYU in 1990. He's represented by Ben Ruby Gallery in New York and Robert Morat Gallery in Berlin. He's had 5 monographs published, a few of which were published by Aperture, including Figure and Ground, Fall River Boys, Touching Strangers, Manhattan Sunday, and I Want Your Love. He was a recipient of a 2015 fellowship from the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation. I'd also like to mention that from now until tomorrow night, you can get Touching Strangers half off on Aperture's website, as well as a special discount on one of Richard's limited edition prints that we're selling. I'll put the link to these products in the chat. Aperture's programs are supported in part by generous donations from our board of trustees, our members, and other individuals, and corporate and private foundations. If anyone has any questions for Richard during this talk, you can type them out in the chat. And then they'll get posted. Again, thank you everyone for tuning in. And now I'll let Richard take it away.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming to my first live stream event ever in quarantine. And so I'm going to share a PowerPoint I put together about Touching Strangers and sort of the new context in which this work is going to be viewed during and post the coronavirus crisis and pandemic. So can you guys see my screen? Emily, do you want to put my screen on now?
Yes, 1 second. There we go.
Okay. So I can't see you guys, just so you know. It's not like Zoom. I'm just looking at my screen and looking into the camera being surveilled by all of you. So I will try to not pick my nose or do anything embarrassing. And I am wearing pants, just so you can see. Okay, so this is like photography and art, and in many respects is about communication. And, you know, I think the context of work changes as the context of life changes. So, and experience. And so when I made Touching Strangers, that work grew out of, I think, an experience that I had in my life. And when it was put out into the world, I think people experienced it through their own experiences and through their own filters. So of course, you can make your work and put it out there and everyone's going to interpret it the way they will. And that's usually based on their own ideas. But for me, this work was about questions, and it was about my own experience. And so I think the origins of this work, I'm trying to, there we go. In the coronavirus era have really changed. That idea of intimacy, which is one of the things I was exploring, is front and center with this work. So as you can see, there's this one of the most recent magazine covers to kind of explore, you know, how we relate and connect to each other is this this month's issue of Vogue from Portugal. So again, this idea of intimacy is completely radically shifted in a matter of weeks. And again, to reiterate that art is often is a communicative. It's a means by which to communicate your thoughts and feelings and ideas. So this picture actually is from the from the Spanish flu of 1919. And I was going through some archival material and found some really interesting imagery from just over 100 years ago. And then this is a Touching Strangers that I made in Cincinnati. So, like, the experience I had that I think propelled me to make Touching Strangers was a very social experience. It was based on my interpretation of intimacy, my experience of intimacy, my desire for intimacy. And it was also a social experiment. It was a question of what would happen when I confronted people with this very unusual request to have people ask them to step outside of their comfort zone and touch one another for a photograph. So just imagine that context now, where we're literally afraid of other people, where there's this physical distance now between us, but I also think there's a real kind of psychological distance too. I've never experienced this feeling myself, where I'm afraid in a way of the outside world, in a way I never experienced before. So in a way, when you look at these Touching Strangers pictures, I think that they almost seem a nice remembrance of how things used to be. Hopefully we can return to this way of being with each other, but I think that there's going to be collective trauma. I think that we, as a world, not just as a country, but as a world, have been and are being and are in the midst of a traumatic event. And the frustration with that, with this trauma, is that to get through this experience together, I think we yearn to be cared for, or to care for someone, to be held and nurtured. I have many times in the last month and a half just kind of felt so heavy from all this, and felt a sense of like a child whimpering, almost like, what is this really happening? Is this just a bad dream? And I know that feeling of being afraid and a scared child is something that a lot of people are feeling right now. And so I think the tendency is to want to be nurtured and held from that experience. So I want to talk about the context of, for me, of Touching Strangers. So this is me as a young kid. I was I didn't come out of the closet until I was 18, which is actually pretty young. But in high school, I was in the closet, and I was full of desire and raging hormones. And it found its expression in nightlife. And this was my first boyfriend, was a DJ in Chicago, and it was a juice bar, so you could be under 18. And I would go to this club called Medusa's, and I would dance on those boxes there. And it was a place where I started to find a sense of community, a sense of belonging. I was not a jock in high school, and you know, in the pecking order of things, they often were at the top. But I was creative, and I had found photography, and I found dancing and nightlife. And you know, I moved on to New York and continued this exploration of nightlife, and I think it really intersects with the idea of Touching Strangers, because there's a culture of promiscuity in gay life that has been there for a long time. We've only really been accepted into the mainstream in the last 20 years with gay marriage rights. And it's the gay lifestyle, I think, is also, there was a freedom to redefine what a relationship was, or what intimacy could be. So, and with that in mind, I grew up in this era of going out to nightclubs with HIV and AIDS in the backdrop. So my youth was plagued by another plague, so to speak. And so when I came out, like, I was literally just like 4 or 5 years shy of a whole generation of men that were basically decimated by the disease, and not just men, women too, but particularly large numbers of gay men were victims of the HIV virus. And so this was always the backdrop. There was this mortal dread that I had associated with sex, and trying to learn about your desires and to explore those desires and to understand them. With that as the backdrop was a pretty heavy experience. One that I've looked at younger gay men today, and they don't. I until a month and a half ago, they weren't encumbered. I think the way that I had been in my youth, as there's been a lot of more advanced treatments for HIV, and it's no longer a death sentence. So, so this idea of basically gay cruising culture, I think it informed my interest in touching strangers. And then this is old graffiti. This is from like the early 1990s in New York City. Fuck me safe. And so I got out and about and up to shenanigans as a young person, and into relationships, and you know, having friends and doing drugs, and then in 1996, I myself found out I was HIV positive, and that was a seismic shift in my outlook. My frame of reference changed completely, because no longer was I afraid of having this virus. I had it. And so in a small sense, there was a sense of relief that I no longer had to carry that fear around with me. But I was also scared to death. I didn't think that I would live into the new millennium, and I was really lucky that I came out just as protease inhibitors came to market, and basically they changed the course of the disease. And so now I've been HIV positive for 24 years, and would be what you would call a long-term survivor. So I slowly crawled back into nightlife, and with that experience, you know, that I kept observing these crowds gather together, and the relationship between strangers, and the sexual nature of that relationship, or in public, just the idea of sharing public spaces. I've always been really drawn to, like, looking at crowds and looking at people in confined spaces and in their relationship to each other. You know, this sort of randomness of a group that has been brought together by random circumstances. So that was another idea that I had that informed the making of Touching Strangers, was this idea of community, of random people, and how we relate and connect to each other, and believing in sort of invisible glue that I think binds all of us together as human beings and as earthlings, and in a sort of religious sense, the idea of brothers and sisters, and really feeling that and believing that, even though I know it's sometimes really hard to believe that about certain people, because there's some really bad, evil people out there. So it is in conflict with that idea conceptually. But and then another thing that informed the Making Touching Strangers was my an interest in a project I developed in the early 2000s called See America by Bus. And I started documenting bus travelers around the country at Greyhound bus stations specifically, because I wanted to tell the story of long distance bus travel and the arduous journey that these travelers would have. And I was very interested in these transient spaces, the bus stations where people were coming or going from somewhere. So I started with my 8x10 large format camera, making these portraits at the bus stations, and there would be these communal benches. And I wanted to like sort of explore the class issues at hand with a lot of the underclass and taking bus. And also after 9/11, a lot of people stopped flying, and I know that a lot of comparisons have been made to the halt in air traffic today as after 9/11. So there were some interesting write-ups about bus traveling back then. And so that also kind of compelled me towards this project. And then it was on these communal bus benches with my 8x10 view camera that I really wanted to make pictures of 2 or more strangers that didn't know each other on the same bench. So this took a lot of asking a stranger to make their portrait to another level for me, because there was a level of orchestration that needed to happen to arrange for 2 separate people that did not know each other to consensually agree to take a picture with each other. And that was a really new challenge for me. And so I was, I really liked the way that experience felt. And it was, I think, problematic, and it was also challenging, and I thought it was interesting. And so kind of piecing all those different parts of my, the questions I had and the experience I had with strangers, I thought about, what if I did a project where I gathered strangers and brought them together and asked them to touch each other for a photograph. So, so that's kind of what the origins of this work were. And then when the work became public, I think it really shifted to a very different experience, because people saw the work and they started telling their own stories about the work, and they brought in their own experiences. And not that I can tell you or anyone what to feel about these pictures, but I got quite a lot of fan mail from people, and I would say the majority of those emails and messages were from women, and I think a lot of them were from lonely women that had a projection of this affection and this intimacy that really touched them. And that is not, you know, a written in stone. There were a lot of guys responding to the work too, but I think that is definitely one context of the work when it was first put out there between 2011 and 2014. Another interpretation, I think, of these pictures was one of actually discomfort. So some people looked at Touching Strangers and they were repulsed, and they thought, ew, gross. And so I think in a sense that's interesting, because I think that reaction and response connects a little bit to some of the fears that we now carry about strangers in the COVID era. But another context that I think we can talk about was after the election in 2016, and the subsequent elections in Brazil and Hungary, and this xenophobia on the rise all over the world, fear of strangers. And so I thought that the context in a way had shifted for the work like 3 or 4 years ago. And in fact, we, I think in the summer of 2017, I tried to do a really giant, big, like huge group touching strangers in Union Square in New York City with Aperture. And we made an open call. We were trying to do this like almost like a sort of a protest slash celebration of diversity. And I brought my 8x10 out there, and I think we got maybe 50 people. And it didn't work. I didn't like it. It wasn't successful. It was an experiment, and it's really hard to create intimacy with 50 people. So those banquet photographers are like really skillful, and I give them my accolades. So anyway, getting towards the end here. I mean, I think that when I look at these pictures right now, as I'm looking with you, I feel longing for the times when we could do this, the time when approaching a stranger and first of all, even being a photographer and approaching someone now feels there's a new layer of discomfort. I did a shoot last week in New York City, and at the height of the apex, and you'll be seeing that work soon in public. But I felt really hesitant about walking up to people, and of course I had my protective gear on. But you know, looking at the Touching Strangers now and seeing this level of intimacy, even though it was manufactured intimacy, there was always the sense that there was an authenticity to the experience and to the staging, these you know, photographic explorations. So it's really compelling to be able to look at people's face and see their whole face, because when you walk in public now, most people are wearing masks, and so we can see each other's eyes and the bridge of each other's nose and a forehead, and that's kind of it. So for let me just digress to this picture here of Andre, and I forget the woman's name that he's with, but you know, part of shooting Touching Strangers for me was also cataloging all different types of people, all different kinds of Americans, of all stripes and body sizes and races and creeds. So I made this picture towards the end of the project where I knew I wanted to photograph a blind person. So this guy Andre volunteered through the Cincinnati Organization for the Blind, and this was one of those moments where it was really this really there was a lot of feeling associated with the moment that was sincere. That smile that Andre kind of has creeping on his face is totally real. So anyway, you know, a stranger picking up a child, like this picture raises a lot of issues, I think, about trust, and now, I mean, I can't imagine that I could make this kind of picture right now in the world. They would have to know each other. They would have been quarantined together. Same with this image.
Richard, there's a question that says,
it kind of relates to what you're just talking about, but how much directing in terms of pose or facial expression was needed or given, and how difficult was it to get strangers to pose together?
There was a lot of direction, because if left unattended or left undirected, people would just like hold hands or just put their arm around each other like this. So I thought that I wanted more intimate pictures and more compelling pictures. So I had to step into the role as director. And what I did eventually was I started looking at a lot of pictures of couples together from photo history, and I started looking at how couples interacted together out in the street and in the parks in the world. And so I started like basically directing these points of connection, which I think is a good segue to this picture with the woman who's being caressed. Her name is Dawn, and she's in a stage 4 cancer. And so this was in Hawaii, in Oahu, at a Buddhist temple. And the woman caressing her, Suket, was on her honeymoon. And I saw Dawn, and I asked her if I could make I told her, I gave her the pitch about the project and the concept, and she agreed. And when I put them together, I felt compassion and empathy for Dawn and what she was experiencing being sick. So my direction to Suket was to caress her that gently, and a gentle sort of loving touch like that. And that was really, I think, me, like I was projecting in this moment my concern and my just empathy for this woman who later died 6 months after I made this picture. So, and I think this picture really kind of connects to what we're experiencing now, where somewhere between 0.5% and 3% of our fellow human beings are going to die of this sad disease. So, I think if we could carry some of this empathy for each other right now, because Donald Trump is trying to divide us because he doesn't have anything for us, and he's not there. They're not there to help. They're there for themselves, and especially with Trump, everyone knows that. And so, if we cannot let them divide us and show this same sort of empathy right now, I think that's really important, and something to draw out of Touching Strangers right now. So this is kind of like coming to an end. But again, this was for a commission after the book came out. Cincinnati, an arts organization, hired me to do an iteration of Touching Strangers in Cincinnati. So I went around for like a couple weeks. I had a really great crew, and I made a bunch of new ones in June of 2014. And they were going to be displayed. The end result was to put them in light boxes at bus stations around the city, which was amazing because it was very circular. It was a no-brainer, and it was a way. It's getting dark in here, right? Is that better, Emily?
No, it's still pretty dark. It was like the light turned off in your room. There we go.
Anyway, so this work was ended up being shown in the bus shelters all over Cincinnati, and engaging with the public that way, and also as a bus vinyl. So I thought that this was also kind of ironic because public transportation now is one of the biggest vectors for getting COVID. And so this again feels like something from a former life, and seeing people on the street walking unmasked, and engaging with this project. This was shown in Toronto in 2014 also. And then, this is from my monograph Manhattan Sunday, which came out in 2016. But this is very much what the streets of New York look like right now. I photographed these on a Sunday morning at dawn. So this is basically how the city looks now. I was just there, and it's completely empty. And when I was photographing the city for Manhattan Sunday, it was in the context of New York feeling a sense of, after coming out of those nightclubs where I was touching strangers, I would come out into the most beautiful, dreamlike Manhattan, because it was completely still, and a city that's so busy 24/7. This was the inspiration for Manhattan Sunday, was to photograph this sort of quiet city and make portraits outside of the nightclubs. And now when I look at these images from Manhattan Sunday, I feel again, the context has shifted for me. They remind me a little bit now of what it was like to be in New York this last few days, which was that emptiness did not feel beautiful and magical. It felt scary, and it felt not right, and it felt like a sense of death, that the city had become so still, and so it's a real contrast, actually, to have experienced New York on an empty Sunday morning and experience it like every day, every hour of every day right now, where it's just completely, the city is so quiet, as are all the cities everywhere on the whole planet. Think about that, guys. It's amazing. And then this is sort of an image I made for my Pier 45 project that I've been photographing at the Christopher Street Piers for years. And this is like what everybody wants right now. They want to get out of their house. And so this was like a typical warm Saturday in early June, before everyone goes out to their beach places at the pier. And I know that the nice days in the city, like I went to Prospect Park on Sunday, and it was pretty crowded with people. And that brings me to this post I saw today on Instagram by Sam Euclid. I think I'm pronouncing his name right. Anyway, if you don't know Sam's work, he's got one of the funnest Instagrams I've ever experienced. But he posted some pictures from Washington Square Park, like a slideshow. He does these great slideshows. And I was reading the comments, and there's now a sense of shame associated with this behavior of being out in public and not being masked and not physically distancing from each other. So if people are like, stay at home, and there's definitely a new ethos and a new morality surrounding people that aren't adhering to the advice of the healthcare professionals and the officials. And so, which kind of this is now the world we live in, right? This is, these are all images I found today, thinking about the different manifestations of the mask and how we've been wearing, masks now to protect us from this deadly virus. But before that, people have been having to use them in polluted cities like New Delhi and Beijing, or protesters in Hong Kong using them to conceal their identity. So it's almost like, I think we're at this moment where our very breath, the things that our lungs are being attacked by this disease, and they're being attacked by the polluted earth. And so there's something, I think, metaphorical about the air we're breathing or not breathing. And a lot of people have been talking about and writing about, in this new era, the air is cleaner, the skies are bluer, the night sky is clearer. And so I don't know if we're going to go back to, I don't think things are going to be the same. And if we don't learn anything from this crisis, it wouldn't surprise me. But I hope we do, and I hope that one of them can be taking care of our planet better, and not abusing it, and listening to science, really. So this is also a response someone had, that a lot of teachers have taught touching strangers, and a lot of students have done their own touching strangers experiences. So this is someone that messaged me on Instagram, and they tried their own socially distant touching strangers, which I thought was interesting and kind of cute. But I was thinking, I'll just go back to this image for a second. I was thinking that there's other ways, though, that we can show intimacy and affection without physical touch. And I think we have to develop those skills better now, because we have to make eye contact with people, and we can intellectually, we have minds, so we can convey intimacy, I think, with the things we say, with the time we give people, with the empathy that we have with people. That's as touching as any kind of physical touch, really. I know we all need the physical touch. I mean, it's literally like oxytocin is produced, and it's good for us. So I'm not denying that, the benefits of physical touch, but in lieu of not being able to do that, I think that we need to learn other ways of being intimate with each other, and I think that means listening. I really do. I think we need to listen better to each other, and that's my advice anyway. So, and these are the closing images are from an ACT UP demo, when people were dying of AIDS, and there was a lot of inaction. Government inaction in the United States was reprehensible. Ronald Reagan didn't say the word AIDS until the late 80s, after the disease had killed thousands and thousands of people. And there are protesters, ACT UP groups formed all over the world, started in New York City, and they went out and they made a ruckus. And I think that's what we need to do today, again, because the government has been so absent in terms of leadership for this crisis. And so today you see this new kind of protest, right? We have these Tea Party groups that are protesting the right to go and infect and kill their fellow Americans because they want liberty. And then, you have the healthcare workers counter demonstrating. And this is the last picture, because when I look at this picture, I feel such strength, and so, like, talk about touching strangers. This woman is communicating fury. This is like the man standing in front of the tank in Beijing picture that we all know from Tiananmen Square. I mean, this woman, she has every right to be furious, and I like her determined opposition. So I think that's something we have to carry with us too. So I think I'm ready to open it up for questions. Are you there, Emily?
Yeah, I'm here. What a great note to end on. Someone asked, for someone that works mostly with people, how do you think you'll need to redirect your work due to the current situation? Yeah.
I don't know. I mentioned that I was a little afraid. I'm more afraid of the world than it's true, but I think I think that living with HIV for 24 years and having lived through a pandemic that affected particularly people who engage in behavior that I have engaged in, which would be homosexual behavior, that I feel a little less freaked out, I think, if that makes sense. When I photographed in New York recently, I felt okay. I mean, I kept 6 feet away, and but it's my job to go make pictures of people, and I think that I will keep doing it with more caution and with more concern for my own and everyone else's health and safety. But I think that I think a lot of image makers are drawn to do what they do because they really have to do it. They're inspired to do it. So I think I'll keep photographing people. People look different, obviously, since we're all kind of more shrouded. But I think that it's interesting to try and challenge the notions of boundaries and communication, and how can we creatively and effectively try to engage with people as photographers. I think that's a good challenge.
Yeah, agreed. Another question, I like this one, in regards to the Touching Strangers work. The early work from the series seems to play up the awkwardness of touching a stranger. The newer pieces have a sense that the subjects feel comfortable with each other. Can you talk about this change? Full disclosure, Richard photographed me for this series in 2008.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Awesome. Yes, they were awkward. And I think those have a place in the continuum of the series. I think that they were part of the exploration, part of my experience setting out to just indulge this idea. So without knowing what I wanted or what I was looking for, the earlier ones were more awkward. And I think that they are honest in that they revealed the awkwardness of the experience, but I think they were honest in that they also revealed my own awkwardness around being a director. And I think as I kept doing them and got more comfortable, and also recognized that I wanted to get more from my subjects, that I became the image became more intimate by design. I wanted to create more intimacy, and I wanted to push some of the ideas of the sensuality between strangers, and I wanted to push the fact that you could be sitting next to a total stranger at a bar, and one of them will turn around and start talking to you, and 2 years later you might be married. So I mean, it's like there's that idea of potential. I really wanted to push that forward.
Cool. And actually, there's another question. Do you know if any of the subjects maintained a relationship after they were introduced to pose together? You don't know?
No wedding invitations yet.
Wow, that would be a wild wedding. How do you approach people who are very different to yourself and might be defensive about being approached, and get them to relax for the portraits while they're out of their comfort zone? And how do you get authenticity between those people when they're often from very different demographics?
That's a good question. I don't know if you've ever been approached by me. I mean, I've seen myself approaching people in video, and it's really weird. But I just like walk up to people. Sometimes it really just depends on what's going through my head. Sometimes I think I'm really like smooth and friendly and like just kind of like come on warm. And sometimes if I'm like more anxious, I might come on too anxious, and I end up like sometimes pushing people away. So I don't always get someone to agree to be photographed. And of course, not everybody wants to be photographed or was thinking that they would be approached by a stranger and asked to be photographed. But I think enough people are interested in the process of photography and in being a subject and being a model, or of engaging with an idea that an artist might have, that they're receptive once you get through that initial awkwardness, like, who are you? What do you want? And express what you want. And then I think I don't have any problem generally approaching people that are from different backgrounds as me, unless there's a linguistic issue. But I mean, I don't really, I see myself like liking people, or interested in looking at people, and interested in experiencing all different types of people. So certainly the interest is there on my part, so I'm not really hesitant. And I'm not that afraid of getting rejected, because the rejection, you can just move, you sometimes you're bummed out, but you just move past it really fast. And I mean, it's not like you lay in bed at night thinking about the people that turn you down for a photograph. So, and what was the second part of the question?
How do you get them to relax? How do you get authenticity between those people when they're often from very different demographics?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think people all have that kind of like idea in mind of us, we're all connected, you know? I mean, if COVID doesn't teach us that, then I mean, we're all susceptible to the same thing. We all share a planet together. We're all, came out of that primordial swamp as a single cell. It binds us all, everything. So I think a lot of people get that. I mean, you don't have to be religious to get it, and some religious people don't get it, but I think that I think that that's what people are open about, because they know that and they see that in the concept right away. Like, oh yeah, like, sure, I'll touch another human being. But now nobody's gonna go up and cuddle someone, unless I guess we can use this once we get these tracking apps and little certificates of immunity.
Yeah.
We'll do an immunity stranger project.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah.
We'll ask one more question. Actually, just two. I have my own personal question. But one question was, are you still working in 8x10 during the pandemic, or have you shifted to working in smaller formats for the time being?
I am doing both. Cool. I went here and I did a series at the neighborhood grocery store in 8x10.
Oh, interesting.
But I did them about 2 weeks ago, and but there's nowhere to process them. I don't have tanks at my house, and my lab is closed, so it's gonna be a while before I see that film.
Yes. Oh, that'll be interesting to wait a while to get it processed and look back.
Yeah, and then I did some the work I did in the city was with my Sony digital.
Great. And one question I had that might be nice to end is, how are you staying creative during this time when you're at home? As someone who usually likes to go out on the street and interact with people, I'm assuming you've had to shift your thinking about it. So how are you staying creative, or do you have any advice for anyone?
I mean, I don't feel I'm doing, you know, I did that grocery store series. I've done a little other shooting too, working on another project that I don't want to tell anyone about. But you know, that's a small percentage of my time. I mean, I'm doing a lot of reading, and like watching things, just like some entertainment and learning, reading and cooking and gardening. So yeah, I mean, I'm passing the time like everyone is. You know, I not being a you know, being on a freelance schedule, like the whole quarantine thing isn't dramatically different for me as it is for a lot of other people that work in an office. Mm-hmm. And that don't, you know, that are working from home. But yeah, I mean, that just makes me think of, though, like, I feel like we all, if we're able to be home right now, we're privileged actually to not be out there. And I think with an you know, just having a little room in our thinking to just always remember the people that are out working right now, in the grocery stores, in the, you know, farms and processing plants and healthcare workers and firemen and everyone that has to work and that can't not work. You know, they're taking their risk. They should be getting hazard pay. Honestly, anyone working right now should be making more money while everyone else is sitting at home and doing what we're supposed to do, which is to physically distant from each other. But the people that can't, they're at greater risk, and they therefore should be compensated. And I think we should all carry that in our hearts to try and get our politicians to do something about that, and the corporations. Yeah. So, I mean, these fast food workers, you know, they were not part of the paid leave, sick leave. You know, none of them qualified for that. And you know, how many Americans interact with fast food on a daily basis? So, and these are people that are often invisible. You know, now they're literally invisible since it's drive-through. Yeah. But I think we really need to keep them in mind.
No, definitely.
In heart.
Yeah, totally agree. Any last thoughts, or want to say anything else before we wrap up?
I don't. I'm curious how this all looked from like on the other end, because I just see my little green dot there.
Well, I have some people watching, so I'll ask.
Thank you guys for joining. I know I started off a little bit like, what am I talking about? But this usually the second half is always better. So.
No, that was great.
I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for coming.
Yes.
Oh, and if I could just, can I plug my new book?
Yeah, why not?
Okay.
Go
yeah. Here, I have one right here. Oh. Anyway, it's downstairs, but my new book is utterly frivolous, and it's tone deaf to all of the drama we're experiencing right now, and it's called Star Wars T-shirts, and you can get a preview of it at charleslanepress.com. But like a few years ago, I just started taking pictures with my iPhone or my Sony of people. I've seen Star Wars T-shirts everywhere. So like in Mozambique, in Lebanon, in Mexico, in the US. And I built this collection, and my publisher in Japan, Super Labo, celebrated his 10-year anniversary, and he was doing little zines with a lot of his published artists. And he printed my autobiography, I Want Your Love, and so he asked me to do a zine, and I thought the Star Wars thing would be great. So we're going to be having a little big promo push on May the 4th. Be with you.
Oh, that's funny.
So
that's awesome. Well, congrats on that.
I'd show it to you now, but the light's not very good anyway. So
we'll wait.
But thank you for everything and joining.
Yeah. I'll just sign us off. Thank you so much, Richard, and for anyone watching. Again, you can purchase Touching Strangers on our website at a discount until tomorrow night. Anyone who has any questions about buying one of Richard's limited edition prints or any of his work that we're offering on his website, feel free to email us at prints@aperture.org. Thank you so much. We will be doing other events like this, so sign up for our newsletter. Everyone have a good night.
Bye.